Welcome back, everybody. Today is just going to be an episode with me and Mo. We're just going to, different format. We have questions for each other, and we're just going to get each other's opinion. The questions are going to kind of go back and forth. So, Mo, I know we chatted a little bit, but I'm going to start off with question number one. How has law enforcement shaped your parenting?
In a big way. When I was a kid, my parents never allowed me to spend the night at anybody's house. So that was kind of like a house rule anyways. My mom used to say, I pay a lot of money for a house that has a bedroom that belongs to you, so there's no reason you got to sleep at anybody else's house.
Fair enough.
But when I became a cop and I saw the awful things that happen to kids and the influences and how different people live, I was like, no, that can't happen. And background, I was a cop for 16 years before I had a child. So I had a lot of stories to lead up to it, but I will tell you, it's definitely made me I'm a different parent because I'm much older. I had my son at 40, not at 20. And I think I would have been a different parent in my 20s anyways. But being 40 years old and having been a cop, there are so many things that I am constantly hyper vigilant of. That's where one of those things I always say is if you think being a cop won't change you, you're crazy, because it absolutely will. And I think for me, my son is not allowed to spend the night anywhere, not just because like my mom said, we had a room here for you, but coupled with the fact of, I know the things that happen at sleepovers. There's always brothers, uncles, there's nowadays moms that are trying to, pick up your sons. I can't have it, because then I got to go to jail because I have to kill somebody. And now it's been recorded too. So,
oh yeah,
but that's not ever going to happen. He is now in elementary school. I am very involved with his elementary school because it gives me access. And when I came to the elementary school, one of the first conversations I had with the principal was security of the school, that this was wrong. And how do we do this? And how is this? And me and my husband even went so far as we can volunteer at the school. So my husband and I volunteer, and we created, and my husband basically heads it up, but we have a program, a Parents on Patrol program for his school, where parents can sign up, they come in, they check out a radio, and they get to patrol the school and be an extra set of eyes for the security officer, because there's one security officer for his entire school. And it's not a huge school, but it's big enough where if the security officer's on one side and someone comes on the other side, he won't know it. So would I have probably done that had I not been a cop? No, because I would have probably led the same lifestyle that people who never see the things that we see have. And I always say it's to live that way and not know all these bad things. I would probably be different. I probably wouldn't have worried about doing Parents on Patrol, or worried about when I came to the school, hey, that teacher had her door propped open and that gives access to an entire pod of children. That's not okay. Like, those are things I probably wouldn't have had those conversations with the principal. But now knowing that the devastation of school shootings and things like that, that was one of the first things that was a concern of mine when I came to that school. The other side of it is my son, we don't limit, he plays baseball and he does extracurriculars, but now I'm super picky, like the kids that he picks to hang around with. If I see that it sounds bad, but I look at the parents before I look at the kids, because if the parents seem like they are a mess, I'm like, no, you can't hang out with him. You can hang out with him at the baseball field, but no, you're not going to his house. We're not going to birthday parties. I'm very particular about who I allow him to surround himself with, because again, with law enforcement, you see these kids that are good kids get wrapped up with kids who aren't a lot of times, and they get lost in the shuffle. And I'm like, no, that's not happening. So to answer your question, 100% law enforcement affected the type of parent that I was I was going to be before I ever had children, because of all the things that just cumulatively I saw over my career. And then when I had my son 16 years in, I said, I got pregnant with him 16 years in. I had him when I was in my 17th year. And I thought, no, I can't. The other side that was part of the reason I retired. When I had my son, I thought, I can go back to work and we are going to live high on the hog. However, he's going to be with somebody else for 15 or 16 hours at a daycare, dealing with whatever nonsense is going at the daycare, because I've done numerous investigations there as well. And someone else is going to be giving him his foundation. And me and my husband sat down and we talked about that, and we said, if we can in any way prevent that, let's do it. So when I had my son, I was on patrol, so I was working 12-hour shifts, and my husband was assigned to be a lieutenant in homicide. So he would leave and not come back for 3 or 4 days sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
So the idea was our son was going to be with someone else for probably between 15 or 16 hours every single day that I was working, if not more. And I thought, that's not okay. These are the kids that we deal with. Those are the kids that we deal with that have those kind of situations and setups. So all those things definitely impact the type of parent that I am with him now, and impact how I handle him, and even the day-to-day interaction I have with him. I realized that the parents that we had to respond to their calls all the time in their houses where they had kids that were out of control and, I can't get my 5-year-old to go to school or get into his car seat. These were parents that didn't set boundaries from the very beginning. So from the time I started rearing him, when he was old enough to start understanding, even at that 1-year mark, I started making sure that I set boundaries with him, and he understood this is how the expectation works in my house. And that was something that was born out of me seeing parents not doing a good job in law when I had to come out and deal with parental issues because they didn't know how to handle their situations. So long story, yes, it affected all parts, I think, all facets of my parenting.
Well, and I think I'm interested, and then again, your son's still relatively young, and we'll probably we'll talk about this as the years go by, but because again, like you said, you were already in law enforcement by the time you had your son. I was not. Both my kids were already born. They were still relatively young, but I remember my mentality. I didn't think about the same things that I thought about once I became a cop. And I mean, everything from phones, social media, security around the house, cameras, making sure all the doors are locked. My kids still to this day talk about this. My biggest bugaboos were safety, security, and respect. But also just trying to explain to them why they couldn't have a phone when they were younger. And then once they got older and they were teenagers, explaining to them the dangers of social media, what to be on the lookout for. I have a son and a daughter. And it's just different. And people who are there's like bad people out there. And I've always tried to do my best to balance not creating a fear of everyone they come across, but also having that understanding, like, you don't need to be nice to every adult or respect every adult. Because I saw that in my career with child abuse and pedophiles and things like that. They basically try to prey on that because your kids are young. They've been taught always respect your elders, be nice to adults. I'm like, hell no. And I'm like, no, you don't have to hug every adult. You don't have to hug every family member because you never know what's going to come from. And again, this caused issues with some people that I was close to. They're like, why don't your kids, they're not very loving. And I'm like, they don't have to be. They're not going to come sit on your lap or hug you. They don't even have to talk to you. I don't give a shit. They don't need to be disrespectful about it, but I've seen it. And then I probably went overboard a little bit on the social media, but again, that just comes from, that's where pedophiles and bad, nasty people who want to do bad things, they try to, they circumvent the parenting nowadays, and they can find your kids. And so what do they share on social media? Even to this day, my son is older and he gets it now, but my daughter, I try to explain to her, kids these days, she's 16, they share everything with their friends, their locations, where they are, their trips, Snapchat, all these different apps. I don't even know all the apps. And I'm like, this is insane. And I try to explain this to her. And it's created sometimes some friction. But one of the poignant memories that I have, and I'm going to hopefully have my son on soon, he thought I was insane because I would go throughout the house every night, lock all the doors, make sure cameras were up. And when he got older, he was like, that's a violation of my privacy, you're spying or whatever it is. Now he's a Marine and he's like, I get it. I'm sorry I was such an asshole. I'm like, yeah, because when something bad happens, it happens so fast. You don't even understand how fast it can happen. And for you to be leaving doors and windows open and stuff like that, I mean, again, even friends of mine who are not cops or whatever, they're like, dude, you live in a small town. Nothing's going to happen. I'm like, you don't know that. And you don't know how fast these things can happen. And I said, all the locked doors and cameras in the world, it doesn't mean somebody can't break in. I just need a starting point. I need to be able to see something, a time, give me a starting point. And also, I need to make it as hard for you to break in as possible. So hopefully, wake the fuck up. Something's not right.
Right. Right.
Do you guys see that as well? Like doors and locks, and I'm assuming, I don't know if you guys have cameras or not, but like the mentality is different.
100%. It's funny, when I was listening to you talk, I thought about, oh my gosh, these are areas I never even thought about.
Yeah.
Yeah, it affected me. When we built our home, because we built it, we custom built our house. The first thing we did was we made sure they pre-wired our house with exterior cameras that had night vision, that were motion activated.
No, that's not normal. People don't just do that all the time.
Yeah,
I'm realizing.
And I just, until you said that just now, I was like, oh, that's okay. All right. And we made sure that we put 2 cameras on every corner of our house so that every corner of our house is covered. We live on 5 acres. And so we also have cameras that face out on our acreage. So you can see if you're coming down our driveway, all that stuff. So we have cameras with night vision, with motion activation, with a monitor that we can see. We have a safe room in our home that's where the monitor is.
There you go.
I guess I said that, and I'm like, most people probably don't have that.
Most people don't even think about it like that.
Yeah, we have that built into our home. And as you were talking, I also thought about, since my son has probably been 3 or 4, we have taught him that if we're ever out in public and we start giving him hand signals, which he knows, that he knows to go to a place and stand by, and that we will come back and get him, and he doesn't come out until we come back to get him.
Yeah. So go ahead.
These are probably things that people don't normally teach their kids.
So, and I think you just gave me a different idea for another episode, because we were talking, but school security stuff, because again, I have different thoughts and feelings on that, and working with the Secret Service, we have different ways we deal with things. But you mentioned school shootings and stuff. I would explain to my kids, and I'm not going to do it on this episode, but just, hey, if something like this happens, these are the things you need to be doing. I don't give a shit what anybody else is saying. And they've had a couple lockdowns even when they were in school, and they would call me and they're like, yeah, we're good. We know what to do. We're good. So their mentality is different, where their classmates and stuff are freaking out. They're scared. They're crying. My kids are already formulating exit plans. Like if they hear something, they're already thinking about this stuff.
Yeah. And even my son, he has a watch that allows me to track him when he's at school. So when he gets out of the car, he checks in with it. We know he's at school. If he leaves the school, as he's moving about in the school, we can see exactly where he is on an app on our phone. And again, I guess in the grand scheme, when I say it out loud, this probably isn't things that normal people who haven't been cops or have a law enforcement background do.
Yep. Well, and you mentioned it. You mentioned it with the kid, like my kids, even young, they would never just run into a store and be like, and just disappear. Like that's not a thing.
No.
I'm like, you stay beside me. But again, I would explain why. And sometimes it was scary, and they would but I would always explain to them, this is why I'm doing this. This is my thought process. And I didn't mean to tell the story, but the guy who started America's Most Wanted, or it's some TV show, but his son was snatched at a clothing store so fast.
Yeah.
And I don't know how or why that happened. I didn't dig into it, but like we've seen that. Like, I don't know where my son is. They're gone. And like you said, tracking, like all these things. Yeah.
I do all this. And like I said, I'm sitting here listening to you and I'm like, yep, I do that too. And I guess this isn't absolutely normal. We talk about, if we have a plan that if someone breaks into our home, that we know this is my husband's duties. This is what I do when it comes to our son. I go to him. We make sure that I'm covering him. My husband's doing this, and my son knows that his role is to find me so that I can do my role of protecting him.
Yep.
And I guess in the grand scheme of things, normal people don't have those kinds of conversations with their children to say, this is how we execute our plan in our home to keep ourselves safe. But I always explain to him so that even though it might be something people go, oh my gosh, why would you tell your kid that? That's going to scare them. It's scary if they don't understand the why, and they don't understand that you're going to keep them safe. And I think that for him, it's just like, oh yeah, okay, Mom, I find you because you're the one that's going to keep me safe, and Dad's going to do this. Yes, that's it. So in his head, it's not scary. It's actually comforting, I think, because he thinks, okay, we have a plan to deal with the situation if it comes up.
Correct. A lot of people freeze. And again, my kids laugh because I would teach them from early age. We'd be clearing the house. hey, somebody kicks in this door. What are we doing? How are we in the middle of the night? Or, hey, we're in the living room. Like, what are we doing? Who's calling 911? Da da da. All these things. But I'll tell you this. It'll be funny to see because when my kids started driving, I had the same conversation with both of them individually. My daughter as well. It's like, hey, somebody's following you. Don't go home. You go straight to the police station. Don't freak out. Also, if they tap your bumper, doesn't mean you got to get out because these are all methods that bad people will use to do bad things. I'm not saying they're always going to snatch you or rape you, but sometimes they want to steal your car or whatever. And again, they live in a small town, but in bigger cities, they will tap the back of your bumper, block, and then another car will jump in the front. 4 dudes will jump back, give me the key. And it's like all these things will start happening. And and I could only imagine young teenage drivers in, Chicago, DC, Miami, LA, all this other stuff. This stuff happens all the time. And I've talked about it before. I had an FBI buddy. So in Chicago, these people, some bad people try to do this to them. They were all strapped up. They were about to go raid a dude's house. So they had so they did it, pinned them in, and they got out with guns. The FBI guys got out with guns, and they said, they dipped back in the cars and they dipped out. I'm like, imagine if that's a 16-year-old driver who's never done anything. They don't know what's going on.
Right. It's scary. And that's what I think with being a cop, it constantly has me thinking about preparation for the worst case scenario.
Yep.
And as a result, I think that I've also started to share with my son those preparations because I need him to be part of the plan because he is getting bigger,
Yep.
So it definitely, it's changed me a lot now that we're sitting here talking about it a lot.
Yeah. Well, this is supposed to be somewhat rapid fire, but again, I knew it would be thought provoking. Number 2 is, and again, this one's a little clunky, but has law enforcement changed the way you view, I guess I'll call it civilian work, but non-law enforcement jobs and like the roles you're willing to accept, how you interact with your co-workers, supervisors, whatnot?
Yes. And I will say it does on a couple different levels. One, I think it has made me more picky in what I'm going to do for a living. I did a job that I loved for a very long time. Being a deputy sheriff was absolutely one of the best things that I've ever done. I wouldn't change it. There's some ups and downs that go along with it, don't get me wrong, but I really loved the job I did. So now, post law enforcement, I'm very picky about what I'm going to do because I want to do something that I'm going to be able to have that same satisfaction when I go home at the end of the day. I want to feel like what I'm doing it feels like it matters on some level. I have inadvertently discovered things that I didn't know that I would enjoy when I was a law enforcement officer. I started doing a lot of training and teaching, and that was something I would have never thought I would have enjoyed. So that has definitely been a door that has opened up to me that excites me. On the other side of the coin, in civilian world, it is hard for me to get amped up about when I'm working jobs about things that aren't life-threatening. Working a job where you dealt with things going horrible in an instant, life and death situations, having to figure out resources at a moment's notice, look at a big picture while you are completely being sucked into something that almost makes closes your vision in, and you've got to make sure that you can stay focused and keep that big picture. It's hard for me to get amped up when they're like, oh my gosh, we don't have enough staples. And I'm like, I don't know what you want me to tell you about that. If we need more staples, we can go ahead and get it ordered, but I can't get that amped up. And I think in civilian world where they work jobs that are just and I don't mean to knock anybody about the job that they do because every job's important.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's hard for me when I go to a job now that's a completely civilian job, for instance, and I'm in an office or I did an office job or looked into doing some office jobs, and they're like, well, what would you do if this happened? And I'm like, well, I'd evaluate the situation. We'd figure out what our resources are, and I'd direct this person to do that. And they were like, you wouldn't be panicked? I'm like, no, it doesn't deem panic unless somebody's died. Even when I left the sheriff's office, I went as a adjunct instructor for a very long time at a college and subsequently became an academy manager at that college. And so I oversaw the training aspect, even in that world where we were doing a lot of teaching the cadets how to become a cop. I always used to say there's no emergencies unless somebody's been killed. And outside of the gun range where that could potentially happen, in the classroom, I'm not going to get amped up if we have a problem. We're going to get it solved. We'll figure out what it is, because there's always a way usually to solve the problem. We may not like what the way to solve it, but there's a way to solve it, and we're just going to get it done. But I'm not going to run my blood pressure up and get all stressed out about it, because I think that is a huge takeaway I got from law enforcement, that you can't think clearly and you can't solve a problem if you are freaking out about the problem. And even in a situation with us, when I got there, if someone had been shot or killed or whatever, I still had to keep my wits about me so that I could deal with what was going on. If somebody's dead there, well, I can't help that person anymore. So now I got to figure out how we can figure out who did this. If the person's on scene, how do I get that person into custody? You know, if we need to find that person, do I need to set perimeter and other resources? I can't think about those things if I get there and I start screaming because the sky's falling because there's somebody dead there. If it's not at that level, that the level of threshold for me of freak out is a lot higher nowadays. And so that's where I say it translates in the civilian world. You know, they'll go, oh, that wouldn't panic you? No, it would not.
Yeah. And it makes me laugh because, again, I didn't go from school to law enforcement, but I was an assistant store manager for Abercrombie and Fitch early on. And I remember my district manager, red face, veins popping out of his fucking head, sweating with rage because some t-shirt display wasn't exactly correct. And I remember the panic that I had, and I'm like, oh my God, and I think about that now. Sometimes it'll pop up and I'm like, that is the stupidest shit. Like, you're that upset about what is going on. But I can only imagine, like, for him at that moment, that's the most important thing that could ever happen in his career. I think the dude was a dick overall, but whatever. And people deal with that stuff all the time.
Yeah.
All the time. And then let me hit up question number 3. How has law enforcement shaped your relationships? And I'll elaborate a little bit. Husband, family, friends, like old friends, new friends. You already kind of tapped on the parents that your son is going to be making friends or whatever. So you've already kind of touched on that, but I want to lead off with, and you can correct me. I remember because we knew each other prior to you meeting Frank, your husband, and it was like, I don't know, first date, second date, something like that. And you told BJ and I pretty much said, look, I'm going to have kids. I'm going to get married. You're fun. That's cool. I think you're a good guy. But I am not trying to spend any more time on this if this is not where your head's at. And I remember BJ and I going, damn, like that's okay. That again, that might not have had anything to do with law enforcement. You might have always been like that, but that's kind of the gist.
I think it definitely did have something to do with law enforcement, because when you're so used to dealing with confrontation, the way I avoid confrontation in my personal life is dealing with anything that could become confrontational before it does. So instead of waiting until we get 6 months down the road and I'm going, well, why aren't you marrying me? What's going on? And him going, I didn't ever say I was.
I never said that.
Answer all those questions right now. Let's figure this out right now. If that's it, if you have no interest in it, cool, we can kick it. But just know I'm already out the door looking for something different, is what I basically was explaining to him. And I think that because in law enforcement, we have to deal with confrontation so much, that I'm one of those people that I'm very direct. And it made me very direct, and it made me very matter of fact about things, and try to put myself in a situation where we discuss things that could become emotional before they do. So that was absolutely, I did that to him. And I said, I'm not asking for an answer today, but just so you know, I'm going to need one soon, because I'm not going to sit around and just be your girlfriend forever, is what I told him. Yeah. And lo and behold, he was like, oh, okay. I guess I got to tighten up.
This is what we're doing.
This is what we're doing. And he said, okay. So, and but I think that definitely, being a law enforcement officer, having that background of having to deal with confrontation and those kind of things, definitely shaped the way I communicate across all facets, even with my mom, my sister, my brother, those kind of things. I will definitely have those conversations or talk to them about something that I think is going to be problematic before it becomes a problem. If we're already there too, the way I interact with them is way different than I think I would have. I do take the emotion out of it. And I'm like, okay, listen, let's talk about facts here. Here's what we're talking. This is the situation. This is my take on it. What's yours? Let's move on. You know, that kind of thing. I think it also, there was a point in my career where I kind of had to get a wake up call from my mom, because I was getting, she would come and hang out with me sometimes, and I'd be getting ready for work or whatever. And one day she said to me, she goes, the minute you put that vest on, your whole attitude changes. And I said, what do you mean? And she goes, before you put that vest on, you're very, oh, mom, can you, da, da, da. And she's like, you put the vest on, it's like, hey, can you do such and such? Go do this. Or she's like, your demeanor changes. So for me, it was a wake up call, because I know that in uniform, when I'm doing my job, I definitely need to have that. But I really started checking myself a little bit when I was in uniform and around my loved ones, that I would make sure that I tempered myself a little bit more. And then even with people in the street, and when I was dealing with them, I would make sure that if that type of attitude was not warranted or necessary, that I tempered myself a little bit. So it definitely changed the way, my directness in relationships. And I think at times my family saw that. And I think some of it sometimes was looked at as a good thing, especially with like the situations where, let's talk about this before it becomes a problem. But sometimes it was like, oh, wow, you're aggressive,
Yeah. So, yeah. And I mean, even now I'm in my 40s, and my mother just spontaneously will say, it's just so amazing to me that you got into this line of work. She's like, I just remember you being scared of the dark and having nightmares. And I'm like, I was 7, Ma. Like, I did change a little bit, but I hear you. And I will say, for me, it's been kind of an evolving thing, because pre-law enforcement, post-law enforcement, I'd say pre-law enforcement, I was more of an asshole. Post-law enforcement, I did become more aggressive, more fact-oriented. The emotion wasn't necessarily there, which was not great for relationships. And I've tried to learn how to, as you stated, temper that. And also when engaging with like my kids and stuff like that, I also say I'm much more picky on who I allow into my bubble that could actually like affect me. Like, my kids could affect me, emotionally, but most people cannot. It's just not that serious. I don't know if you call it a wall or not, but I'm much more selective. And then it's hard to flesh out the whole thought process, but, making sure that, kind of like what we were talking about, I have to be very selective on what stories, because especially people, when they meet me or whatever, they're like, oh, law enforcement, tell me a story. And I'm like, what do you mean by that? Because I could horrify you. Something that I find funny might horrify your brain, and you think of me as a monster. But the way that you talk to people who have never done the things or seen the things, cops as a whole, they need to be able to valve that out. So that's why, even through all the trainings and different jobs and careers I've had, I seem to be more drawn personally, like hanging out wise, to work with somebody who has like-minded experiences, because we can talk freely and openly. And then somebody will come in that was maybe a teacher or, just some other profession will be like, oh my God, you guys are monsters. How could you laugh about that?
Right.
So I have to be more selective on that.
I definitely, that part too, I agree. It's definitely made me probably be more select. I try to stay away from just hanging out with cops, because I always feel like that's kind of, can be unhealthy.
Yep.
But
Self-feeding. Yep.
I know that my close friends, a lot of them, they understand my mentality. And you don't have to explain yourself, which is always nice. So it's interesting now with my son getting into extracurriculars and things like that, because you're meeting parents, and even the ones that are good parents, I'm like, ooh, they're like, oh, you were a cop for 17 years. I'm like, yeah. They're like, that's awesome. And I'm like, yeah. And when you can tell they want to know more. And I'm just like, no, I'm not going to share those things, because you really don't know what you're opening up, the can of worms, like you said.
You don't really want to know.
No.
All right. Fair enough. All right. Which one may I go?
All right. So I have 2 questions. One of mine is a little bit conceptualized. I want to know what your thoughts are on some things that have changed since we were in law enforcement. So when we were in law enforcement, there was no such thing. I won't say no such thing, but social media wasn't as big as it is now.
Yep.
And subsequently, we didn't have a lot of these huge stories that have impacted the basic day-to-day operations of law enforcement. As a result, now most law enforcement agencies outfit their officers with body cams. We never had body cams. So I wanted to get your opinion on body cameras and how agencies have shifted into having these huge social media footprints as well. What are your thoughts on that? Because I know there are some agencies that they've jumped into the deep end with it. They are all in social media. All their people have body cams. They post all the time with their body cam footage. They post all the time just in general. And for me, at first, I was very not body cam, and now I've subsequently changed a little bit, and I'll explain. But then there are other agencies, and I know of one here in Florida where they've said, absolutely no body cams. We'll never have them as long as I'm in charge. So what's your opinion on body cameras?
So I do have strong opinions on body cams, but I'll start off by saying I think body cameras as a whole are a net good or a net positive for law enforcement as a whole. With that being said, there are obvious issues that have arisen since then, and I'll go over a few. I remember when they started rolling them out at Hillsborough County, I think they had a budget set aside for server storage for footage of like $5 million a year, and I think they blew through that within 3 months because most people who don't understand how that stuff works and the cost associated with it, how expensive storing all that footage is. So I think you're seeing some agency changes on that they don't store every interaction, every video. But I can go through a couple positives. I had a complaint one time from a concerned citizen who basically his whole job and had a YouTube channel. He would just try to capture on video deputies driving what he called erratically. And I got caught up in that. And it was basically, I had to defend myself from a 20-second clip that this guy had on video of me driving quickly to back somebody up. The person taking the video had no idea I was responding to a deputy who asked for backup. He thought he had a domestic hostage situation on the road and had his gun drawn. And so I'm rapidly trying to get their lights and sirens. And then in the midst of that call also was like, hey, stand down, still need backup. It is a domestic. But the call was changing. So on the camera, all you see is me going 100 with lights and sirens. And then you see me turn my lights off, slow down, and then I back the dude up. So this guy was like, this is insane. And that's all you had. If I would have had a body cam on me for that call, they would have seen how the call changed in the progression of the call. And that would have saved me many, many, many days of being interviewed in IA with bosses and having to explain myself from this 20-second clip. But also, I see issues because now cops deal with people at their lowest moments, sometimes their worst moments, mental health, medication, drunkenness, whatever it is that might be doing. And you're dealing with them, and kind of like what we talked about before, in any other capacity, they wouldn't act that way, but you're having to deal with this call. That's now, you can request those. Those are public records. And that can be used for good or bad, as we've seen. I think the overall reason for body cameras coming out is there was a public outcry. They thought that all these cops were just shitbags, abusing their power, talking wild and reckless and all this other stuff. Again, from my personal experience, I may have seen that once or twice on thousands of calls where, and again, ties into mental health. There's other issues that go on with that, but overall, that's not the case. Now that cops wear body cams, they know they're wearing body cameras, so they're going to be professional, or at least they should be. Let's phrase it that way. And so all you're catching somebody you're either trying to help, arrest, having some sort of medical issue, and you're trying to help them, but now your body camera's on. So they might start talking wild and reckless, and now the public can have access to that. And one specific call comes to mind. It was a local politician. This was in Florida. I can't remember exactly what he was, but he was in diabetic shock, blood sugar, whatever the issue might be. He was naked. He was running around his yard screaming. He was being violent. He was saying wild and reckless things, profanity, some racially tinged things. He was out of his mind. Got him in. He ended up Baker acting him, got his glucose or whatever, however you treat diabetes. Again, I'm not a medical professional. And go to talk to him, and he's just like, oh my God, I can't believe that happens. Thank you so much for helping me. And it's like, dude, you have no idea. And then that information was actually leaked out and was used against him.
Oh, wow.
These are things that people don't think about. Also, been through many trainings where they try to show video of like, oh, this was a bad shoot. The guy never even had a gun because of the angle the cop was in. Then you get 2 or 3 different angles and you see the suspect clearly had a firearm or was reaching down and pulled out what appeared to be a firearm, and that's why he shot. But again, they tried to use that one angle to just destroy this law enforcement professional's career. So it can be used good and bad, I think. But again, like I said, I think overall it is a net positive. I think agencies across the U.S. need to do a better job of deciphering which ones need to be released for public record. Because the way the rules are now, basically, if it's there and somebody wants it, they can get it. There needs to do a better job of focusing on that. Also, it's technology, so sometimes it doesn't work.
Yeah.
You go to do an interview, whatever, the body cam. Also, you get into a fight, but the body cam either doesn't work, doesn't upload properly, corrupted file, or you're in a tussle fighting with somebody, it gets knocked off. So now you just got a body cam footage recording dirt, listening to the sounds of a struggle. You have no idea what happened. Right. So these things all still happen. So it's not a catch-all, but that's kind of my take on it.
Okay. Like I had said, I originally I was like body cam. When I worked the street, I was like, I don't need, I don't want a body cam. I do my job. I do it well, et cetera, et cetera. But now with seeing the evolution of how the body cams are, when they are appropriately used, meaning policies and things like that are put in place are correctly authored, I think that they are, like you said, a net positive. I think that overall it holds the deputies or the officers to task. It makes sure those ones that might have been on the fringe are no longer on the fringe. It also holds the agency, in my opinion, accountable, because if you have people that are responding to calls and you as an agency haven't provided proper training, you now have video that's showing. So it's protecting the officer, but holding that agency to task to say, hey, you need to raise the bar. You need to do the things that you need to do to make sure your officers are necessarily prepared for what it is that they're encountering. I think the reason why I kind of said body cams and social media, where I think that it's gotten overboard with how much they just constantly are pushing out some of the body cam footage into social media because they want to make sure they're kind of staying ahead of the eight ball. I get that to a point, but as the officer that's out there doing the job, I don't know that I want to have constant body cam footage about me pushed out all the time. But overall, I think that it is a good fix to a problem that I think that we had. I don't think it was going to go away if we didn't come up with something like this, because those few officers that ruined situations for us created this space where we had to do something in order to be able to continue to operate and still have our communities be able to get behind us. So for me now, I feel like as a law enforcement officer in a leadership role, you should absolutely be open to having body cameras at your agencies. So those ones that are saying, I'm never going to have body cams as long as I'm here, I'd love to find out, what is your why? Because I don't see the negative of having a body cam outweighing all of the positives that come to body cams. Now, I kind of compounded that question because I talked about the social media part of it too. I think that agencies, because social media has become such a big issue and they all want to have a footprint in it, there's such a focus on social media that sometimes it can backfire as well. We're constantly wanting to put out stories and make sure we're putting out, fires and that kind of thing. And I think sometimes the focus is lost on the things that need to be handled. Take care of our first line officers first. The social media aspect of it needs to take a backseat. And I think in some cases, it's definitely flip-flopped. It's always, the people who are making the stories and pushing out the social media aspect of it and doing those kind of things get the perks, where you have these officers that are out there doing the job every day and they're getting overlooked because they're not making the cut to get on television, essentially. So that's kind of my take on it.
Yeah. And again, social media, I got two parts to this, what I'm about to say, but social media, we all know those officers, and I'm not going to use names, but there were several that I worked with, Hillsborough County or Maine State Police, that had Facebooks, Instagrams, whatever, and they were the worst. They would log on every day and post like, not all heroes wear capes, just another day of protecting. And it's like, bro, shut the fuck, like, who are you? And they want to document every day that they're in the field or whatever they're doing an arrest. And, there's one that comes to mind, and he was just like, today was a pretty good day. Stopped 2 burglars, just doing my part to keep the community safe. And then you read the comments. It's like, oh my God, you're so brave. And I'm like, dude, you arrested a teenage kid stealing from Walmart. Like, shut up. Like, what are you talking about, bro? Or they're going to put every interaction they have, like, oh, taking selfies with people that they help, like, jump their car. Like, what are we doing? Like, you're the reason people hate cops. In my opinion, I think that shit is asinine. Now, on the flip side of that, back to kind of technology and law enforcement. So I was in Hillsborough, and I think every agency that I've ever worked with has GPS in the cars. And I remember when it rolled out, they're like, it's for your safety, so we can track you. If you go code silent, we can find you. It's like, okay, that all makes sense. But then it quickly started being used for supervisors to go, why are you outside of your zone? What are you doing?
Right.
Where are you? Hey, you were 10 minutes late to your zone or whatever. And it's like, dude, I had to pee, or like I stopped at a gas. Like, you had to start defending yourself more and more. So you could see how it started being used more as like punishment and, Big Brother Overwatch, which is asinine. So both sides of those things can be worked on. And as everybody knows who wears a body cam, even if you think it's off or not recording, we all know it's recording and it can be used. And supervisors will use it. But hey, Robbie, you talk about, it's like, you need to be able to have a time to vent and talk to your zone partners without worrying. I mean, we all have bad days with our supervisors, and keeping that stuff bottled up or having fear that you can't talk about it with somebody, it's going to compound the issue. You're not going to be able to process your own feelings, let alone it's just going to drive more animosity. So again, what could be started off as a net positive could quickly be used as punishment. And I mean, law enforcement across the country is already being hammered with personnel issues. They can't get enough people that even want to be a cop. And now they have to worry about every word they say or whether or not they use the bathroom in one zone over another. I mean, it's just that kind of stuff is just insane.
Right. That's where I say, like, body cam, social media, all those things with policy is what we need to figure out, I think, a little bit better. So last one, this one's a little bit lighter. I just thought that sometimes we've been talking about some heavy stuff, and I thought there's another part of law enforcement that to me is a huge part, is the funny stuff that we encounter. So can you think of the funniest call situation that you've had to handle as a law enforcement officer?
Yes, and I'll set the picture for you. I was in FTO, that's field training, with Hillsborough County, and my field training officer, great cop, great deputy, but we always called her the school teacher because she just had that school teacher kind of vibe, but she was a cop through and through, 100%. And I was on a call. I don't remember the nature of the call, but it was either like a domestic or a child service issue, whatever it was. And I'm sitting there, I'm doing my job, I'm interviewing the parents, the kids, and we're in the living room, and I feel this, it's almost like a patting or scratching on my right butt cheek. And she's standing behind me, so I'm looking at her like, is she trying to get my attention? It's kind of a weird way to get my attention, but I turn around and I look at her, I'm like, yes. And she's like, looking at me confused. And I was like, okay, so I was like, that's weird. And then it persisted for like 10 minutes. And I finally said, hey, ma'am, I'm sorry. The mom at the time, I was like, hey, I just need to step out and talk to my partner. I stepped out. I was like, hey, what's going on? Why do you keep tapping me? She's like, what are you talking about? I'm not touching you. Why do you keep looking at me? What is wrong with you? And I'm like, you're not like tapping me or like smacking me on the ass or like, whatever. She's like, are you insane? What's wrong with you? We go back in. They had a cat that was pawing at my silver belt loop, and it was pawing, but it was pawing my ass cheek. And so, yeah, after the call, we started dying laughing. She's like, you thought that I was rubbing on your ass while you're interviewing people? I was like, I thought it was crazy too. And if you knew, the people who knew her, they were like, it's one of those memories that I'm like, that is fucking hilarious.
I love the fact that it never crossed your mind it could be anything other than her.
Well, again, when you're in uniform and all that, you're doing something serious. And I'm not like bending around and I'm like, what's going on? I looked at her like, yes, that's a weird way to get my attention, but okay. But that was, dude, it was so funny. Like we were doing a serious call. Anyway, it was one of those moments that I'm like, that's fucking hilarious.
I love it. With your vest and everything on, it's hard to see like below what's going on.
Oh yeah. I mean, it's basically like in a box, but yeah, those are the things that you start looking around.